Dr. Amy Saltzman is with us today, and she is a pioneer in the field of mindfulness for youth. And I chose her because we chose her to write the first chapter of our book. So our book unfolded over the last year. It took about 9 months to give birth to it. We started with a call for proposals, and we didn't quite know how the book would unfold, but we really felt we wanted to have part one of the book be on the roots, research, and responsibility of educators bringing this work to youth. And then we hoped that we would have different educators be able to share how they're bringing mindfulness to their school from their specific role at the school, whether that's a school nurse or a counselor, a math teacher, and then give examples of how to bring it school-wide and then beyond. So into your district, into your community. We have some chapters by educators who are now working for Department of Education's regional offices of education. So the book grows. But Dr. Amy Saltzman, just let me read here. I have so many books around me. I'm going to read just from the contributor section of the back of the book. Amy Saltzman is a holistic physician, mindfulness coach, scientist, wife, mother, devoted student of transformation, longtime athlete, and occasional poet. Her passion is supporting people in enhancing their well-being, experiencing joy, and finding flow. She's a pioneer in the field of mindfulness for youth and offers in-person and online courses for teachers, counselors, allied professionals, athletes, and coaches. And you can find her at stillquietplace.com or Dr. Amy at stillquietplace.com. So thank you, Amy, for coming. I haven't shown your face yet here, so I'm going to, how about just start by, you started your chapter, you have a long history in this field, but I thought it was really cool how you went from, you were doing your internship, and then you got access to John Kabat-Zinn and all his work at the very beginning, and then after you had kids, then, so kind of just give a quick, I know it's a long story, but how you came to mindfulness in education.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure. And I really came to mindfulness first after a bike accident where I injured my leg and couldn't ride for a while. And that led me to the American Holistic Medical Association. And in the early 90s, Bill Moyers put out the Healing and the Mind special, which featured John's work at what was then called the Stress Reduction Clinic at UMass. And as a resident on the board of the Holistic Medical Association, I just knew when I first saw that segment on the Stress Reduction Clinic that I wanted to go to UMass. So back in the day, it was really an exercise of persistence. So I emailed John over and over, and that was kind of his screening method at the time. So I joke with John that I was just so annoying he couldn't say no. And he says, yep, that was how we chose who got to come. And I went through, my residency director gave me 4 weeks to be at UMass. So I did 6 class 1s and 6 class 2s and 6 class 3s and 6 class 4s. And then I came back and completed the MBSR course with someone locally who had been practicing mindfulness for a long time and read John's book and was teaching based on that. And then I started a research program at Kaiser looking at mindfulness for patients with chronic pain and chronic illness. Then when I had my own kids, I started teaching mindfulness to parents. When my son was about 3 and just having a rough moment, I asked him if he wanted to do feelings practice, which I didn't know what that was quite yet, but he said yes. And so we did a feelings meditation, and that was really the start of me teaching mindfulness to youth. So I really started by teaching in my kids' bedrooms and our hallway and our kitchen. And then the more I thought about it and read about it, um, just the level of stress, depression, anxiety, difficulties our youth were having, it was like, well, why do we need to be 40 and either getting divorced or having a heart attack before we learn these skills? Like, why can't we learn them when we're 5 or 8 or 10? And so then I started sharing the practices that I made up for my own kids, at least the ones that I felt were ready for public consumption, in schools and community settings in my hometown. And then that kind of grew nationally. And now I also teach, teachers, counselors, physicians, coaches, people working with youth who want to share mindfulness with youth. And then I returned also to one of my first love and am sharing mindfulness with athletes and coaches as well. So I've taught in pretty much every setting, public, private, well-funded, underfunded, at risk. I think everybody's kind of at risk these days. Kids, parents, teachers, administrators. Uh, I've yeah. There's very few settings that I haven't offered mindfulness in at this point, as it relates at least to K through 12 education.
I want to spend a lot of our time today kind of walking through what you have in your chapter in the book. And the reason we chose to have your chapter first was because you really talk to the coming of the room of mindfulness. I love that metaphor that you use, through different doors. So this shared room coming through different doors. And I know even in the summit and at our conference, we have people who maybe teach after school programs at their school, or are maybe they're an outside provider of a psychologist who works with schools. So maybe I have, again, so many books here. Let me go into the chapter here. And we'll start by just walking through a few of these shared doors. And I love the chapter of your book is called Emerging of a Unified Field. And we don't have any images in our book, but when you submitted your proposal, you had this beautiful image of these intertwined circles of how we've maybe come to the room from like an SEL background, or from a yoga background, and these circles are starting to you're going to be able to say it much better than me, but just to talk briefly to that. It was very poetic, and I just loved it, and I thought it would be a great way to start the book. And then we'll kind of, maybe after you just briefly describe that, let's then first talk about how I know there is differences of opinion on teaching mindfulness to students, of whether that should come from mindfulness practitioners or classroom teachers, and how that's kind of evolving.
Right. Years ago, when I was speaking at the Mindfulness in Education Network conference at Lesley University in Boston, I did the keynote, and I kept doing this with my hands, of like a certain kind of joining. And so this idea of that we all come into this room of, I'll call it for now, mindfulness in education. Someone else who comes in through a different door might actually call it something else. But for example, there's, to me, a false division between mindfulness and SEL. And my feeling is that people who are doing mindfulness and SEL, first of all, we have very shared intentions, and we have some shared methodology, and then actually some differences in expertise and experience that can be beneficial to each other. But sometimes we get so stuck on which door we walked into that we forget that we're in the same room with the intention of serving youth in the same way. And so whether you come to the, again, I'm calling it the mindfulness room. I don't really care what people call it. Whether you come through the door of mindfulness or SEL or yoga or social justice, once we're in the room, we're working together, and our differences in expertise can probably be utilized um, to enhance all of our work.
Yeah.
So I think my invitation to people is kind of, once you're in the room, to the best of your ability, like, let go of which door you walked through and focus on the sharedness of the room.
Yes. Even at our last conference, I thought it was very important to have Castle represented there, and it worked out well because they're Chicago based as well. But that they spoke to how they saw mindfulness fit in to their model. So it's like we all have these structures and models and how it fits in. But yeah, why don't you next talk to just of being embodying mindfulness and having that practice, how important that is, whether you're a practitioner who goes into classrooms or you're a classroom teacher, and kind of the challenges from each of those two types of educators.
This goes to your comment about responsibilities. I feel very strongly that anyone who's offering mindfulness to youth needs to have their own personal daily mindfulness practice, formal sitting meditation. And the rationale for that, I'm going to borrow from Chris Willard, my co-author on one of the other books that you held up before, or co-editor, is like, if you want to teach someone swimming, you should A, know how to swim, and B, your swimming should be solid enough that if your student or athlete, in this case, is struggling, that you can get in and support them. And that level of skill comes from swimming, most days, every day. And it's the same. It's the same with mindfulness. So again, I know there are people who feel differently than I do, but for me, it's almost, I'm going to use a medical term now, almost malpractice, or it is malpractice to not have your own established, ongoing personal practice and be offering mindfulness to you. And you had said something about the challenges for teachers and then the challenges for people coming in from the outside. So the challenges, I think, for teachers or school staff is really shifting their day-to-day habits that work most of the time in the classroom, like what we would call common classroom management, um, to being a much more responsive way of interacting. So, for example, I had an English teacher who worked in a very high risk setting, low income, high risk setting. And she would actually say to her kids, like, okay, for the next 15 minutes, we're doing mindfulness. I'm not Miss, I won't put in her last name. You can call me by my first name for these 15 minutes. Like, kind of our regular rules of the classroom don't apply. That doesn't mean you can't be disrespectful, but like, you can put your head down on your desk, you can get comfortable. She made a really clear transition between her English teaching time and her mindfulness teaching time, and that let her shift into a more responsive, kind of less authoritative mode for those 15 minutes. And she said that the kids really and these were teenagers from challenging backgrounds. The kids really respected it and didn't test her limits. And I think part of that is because she also had very clear limits in her classroom when she was in English teacher mode. So I think for teachers, the difficulty is shifting from kind of typical classroom management into the more responsive mindfulness mode. For counselors, it's shifting from kind of the therapeutic, almost fixing mode to a more being with mode.
How a school might decide what is the best way to bring this more than just maybe they have one teacher in a classroom doing it and they're trying to decide whether they integrate it more into the culture of their classroom, of if they should go with a resource provider, if they should have some teachers trained in a certain curriculum, or just.
To me, I don't feel like it's either or. And hopefully at your school, you have one or two people who are really interested. And then those people can participate in a high quality training. And I'll come back to that in a minute. And then be doing it in their classroom, maybe even be doing it not only in their classroom, but maybe the other classrooms for their grade level. So that if someone else at their grade level, that's not their strong suit or their interest, they would offer mindfulness to their colleague students as well. And then again, you can look at a whole school program where the entire school is trained in offering mindfulness to their students. And in terms of high quality programs, this goes back to what I said before. To me, honestly, I would just skip any program that doesn't require you to develop your own practice. And yes, like as an administrator, it's like, oh, I just want someone to hand me or my staff scripts and let the staff read the scripts. But I it seems like that might be cost effective, but in the long run, I think it's better off for people to invest in high quality training where whoever's going to offer it, and I don't feel like all the teachers need to offer it unless that's just the model that the school chooses. But those people who are going to offer it need to have a practice and need to be applying their own personal practice of mindfulness in how they actually deliver mindfulness to their students.
With mindfulness gaining so much popularity, it is starting to be more of a slap on fix, and that's not what we want it to be. So maybe talk to that of, with it becoming more popular, what are some of the cautions, or like what should we, have our minds and hearts focused on right now?
Well, I think there's three things, but I want to pull on one of your other three R's or whatever.
Yeah.
In terms of the research, I think when administrators are looking at mindfulness, they're wanting mindfulness, right, to help their students emotional intelligence or emotional fluency. They want their students to be able to respond rather than react when someone says something nasty on the playground or in the hallway, or when they're struggling with a math problem, or even when they're struggling with difficulties at home. And administrators need to remember that most of the research that shows these benefits of mindfulness has been done with people who have long-term mindfulness practices. So the people delivering the interventions that got the results that the administrators are looking at had long-term mindfulness practice. So I have three kind of soapbox issues. One is that it needs to be secular. Whatever we're offering needs to be secular. Two is that people need to have their own personal practice. And three, and this is becoming more and more well known, is that people need to be trauma informed. And there are some schools that people work in where it's pretty much well known that more or less the entire population is traumatized. And then there's other schools where I think some people can be kind of lulled into a false assumption that there's not trauma in the room. But in any room that we teach in, there's trauma. And so we need to be aware of that as well and be attentive to that.
Yes. To your first point of being secular, you have a section in your chapter, again, coming through the shared room with people coming from different religions, philosophies, belief systems. And a lot of times you might get parents questioning of why we're bringing this, religious thing into schools. And I love the quote you have in your book, of is mindfulness Buddhist? And your answer is mindfulness and compassion are innate human capacities. One does not need to be Buddhist to practice mindfulness and compassion any more than one needs to be Italian to enjoy pizza. So that was just a fun way of looking at that. But just speak briefly to coming to the shared room of mindfulness and education from different belief systems, because we have people writing chapters in our book, a high school French teacher at a Jesuit school, teachers at Quaker schools, at Christian schools, at public schools, and it's different for each.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think actually independent schools have a little bit more flexibility in what they offer and how they offer it. And my personal bar is that I always wanted my teaching to be, I used to say I wanted my teaching to be accessible to the housewife in Ohio. But thanks to Congressman Tim Ryan, who's the person who wrote the Mindful Nation, I don't feel like I can use Ohio anymore, so say Texas. But I want to teach in a way that's comfortable for anyone, and allows them the most possibility of receiving the benefits of the practice. And my definition of mindfulness is paying attention here and now with kindness and curiosity so that we can choose our behavior. And there's not really many parents or teachers who wouldn't want their kids to have those abilities. And I'm pausing because I want to see what I want to say here. But, um, you know, adult MBSR did grow out of um, Buddhism to a certain extent. The way I learned it at the stress reduction clinic at UMass, it was secular. And I don't personally identify as Buddhist. And that quote about the pizza is really wanting to honor the origins of the practice while still acknowledging that it can truly be taught as a secular, I'm going to say science, like a self observation, a self inquiry, and that it doesn't depend on any particular belief system.
Well, why don't we shift here a little bit, because when I introduced you as a pioneer in this work. And so when the seed got planted in me of creating a learning event in the Chicagoland area, it was just going to be a one-day conference on a Teacher Institute Day west of Chicago, and then it quickly grew into more. So at the time, I had already read your book and knew about you and was following you, and you were an inspiration. But then I started researching different conferences that were already out there to get inspiration, but also I didn't want to recreate the wheel of something that was already out there. I knew that a lot of the other conferences and gatherings were on the two coasts, so I thought I wanted to bring something to the Midwest that was a little bit, well, it started as a small idea, but I'm like, oh, I could do this. I love event planning and web design and such, and gathering people. But I really drew inspiration from the Bridging Hearts and Minds conference that you helped put on for many years. So can you talk about how that got started? I know you attended some other conferences first, and probably it wasn't just you that started this, but I think it's important. That's part of the roots of these gatherings.
Yeah, so I'm going to go way back, and you may have it in the book because I don't remember the exact date, but like maybe in 2005 or something was the Garrison Conference, which was kind of the impetus for my thing of being in the shared room that I discuss in my chapter of your book. And so there was the Garrison Conference where it was really a handful of us at that point in 2005 that were teaching mindfulness to youth. And that conference was kind of like a survey of what was happening in the field and best practices. And then from that, I came back and started the Association for Mindfulness in Education, which still exists. And the web page for that is mindfuleducation.org. And it still has a very active listserv. People can post their trainings, people can post their conferences. Um, and we hosted 2 or 3 conferences in the Bay Area um, for mindfulness in education, including, as far as I know, the first in the US conversation about mindfulness in education with John Kabat-Zinn in like 2007, I think. And also at that time on the East Coast, the Mindfulness and Education Network, which kind of ended up being our sister organization, developed, and they were serving mostly the East Coast. And then for a while, I did not share any conferences, and then Steve Hickman at UCSD started the Bridging Conference, and the first year I simply attended, and after that I co-chaired or chaired it. And honestly, for me, it was a huge blessing that you chose to start your conference when you did, because UCSD kind of had budgetary constraints, and Steve had been willing to run the conference kind of at break even, and UCSD wasn't so happy with that anymore, and so the conference ceased to exist really at the time where you were starting to develop your conference. And I feel like it's such a blessing that you started it, and such a blessing that you started it in the Midwest, because that it has historically been a super underserved group in terms of just having access to conferences. And so I'm really grateful that you chose to start it when you did and where you did.
And thank you for saying that about the Midwest. Other people have said that too, like Barnaby Spring. He's director of mindfulness at New York City Department of Education, and he was actually the person who inspired the whole coalition. I had asked him to be a keynote for the first conference, and he said, for sure. And like, what do you think about making this a bigger coalition and really joining forces organization within the mindfulness and education field? And he thought that that would be really impactful if the different nonprofit organizations, resource providers, educators coming from the different doors, that there was a neutral organization. And my first thought was, I'm just a parent. Like, I had a little bit of, who am I to lead a coalition? And he convinced me that I was the perfect person because I was neutral. I wasn't involved with another organization already. And being a parent, and my kid's a little bit older now, I had more time on my hands, where the educators who are on the front lines doing this work, you know, they're not only doing their full-time teaching position, but also the extra time for mentoring, or doing before and after school groups with teachers and students. And so I that I had the courage to do it, and I'm so happy I did. And I wouldn't have had the courage without support of people like Amy and Barnaby and others who encouraged me to do it. And I've learned and grown so much. But we did have, after the second year, it is still a small volunteer team, me mainly behind the scenes right now. And so we had a school mindfulness champion dinner at this year's conference, where at the end of it, we had a beautiful evening and a panel, really inspirational. But I just had to kind of tell it how it was, that I'm in launching this volunteering for the last 2 years, and it is entrepreneurial, so it's been a big financial risk for our family, especially doing it in a hotel, like a beautiful hotel, which we didn't have. Excuse me. I had looked into partnering with schools and such at the start, but didn't have a partnership. And then part of me felt I really love the idea of educators not only being able to go and do professional development, meeting together at a location, but to have it be a really wonderful self-care, personal development weekend, 3 to 4 days, or however many they could take off. But we kind of had, after just barely breaking even and me volunteering for almost 2 years, we had to make the decision of whether we move to one of the coasts where we knew more people would be able to attend the conference, whether that be in Brooklyn or the Oakland area. But we did decide that we're going to at least stay in Chicagoland one more year. Again, it'll be another financial risk again, but I really think how you said, it's been more of an underserved area in the mindfulness area. And so I think and I had so many people, when I brought up that thought of maybe we should move, like a lot of the people who were at the conference who came from Minnesota, Ohio, Indiana, Missouri, you can see the fear in their eyes when I brought that up. So I really feel that there needs to be, and I will commit to having something in the Midwest area each year. Potentially, as we grow and get funders, we could have several conferences and also have them on the coast. But yes, so yeah, I went off on a tangent there, but I would love to finish our conversation with you sharing about your some online training opportunities that you have, because you also have agreed to be one of our discount partners. So we have, if you love all of the videos and learning sessions here in the summit, we have almost twice as many more from the recordings from the 2 conferences that we've had already. We've recorded almost every session. So you can get an annual membership and support our mission that way. It's $100 per individual and $200 for your whole school. So we try to create a really
wow, that's a bargain. Yes, I hope people realize how big a bargain that is.
Yes, a lot of other summits, just even for the summit package, it's close to $200. But it's been really important to us. And you can tell I'm not a businesswoman. That's probably why we're just barely breaking even. But I mean, my husband's a teacher, and I have so many teacher friends. I know how that they're using a lot of their own money to do this, and I really want to value, and I don't want to give it away for free, because we need to value this knowledge and the teachers who are out there that are so amazing. But I wanted to, at least here with us starting and getting launched, to offer it at a price that you really can't say no to. So we hope some of you are able to do that. But yeah, please share a little bit about what you personally do throughout the trainings, because I know there's all different types of trainings. There's some that you're maybe in a cohort, and there's some you're just doing it on your own and listening to videos. There's a lot of different trainings out there, and what exactly is involved with your training.
I want to speak first to like my primary training for teachers, counselors, coaches, administrators, people who want to offer mindfulness to youth. So I have a 10-week online training, and everyone gets to lead a practice and receive feedback on a practice. They do partner practice, which is a beautiful thing, because when it's online, I was just working with someone online yesterday, and she said, oh, the partner practice has been really, really beneficial. And first of all, it gives people a lot more practice in leading and talking about sharing mindfulness with youth. And second of all, when you're online, that's actually what creates community. And it's an in-depth training where people are getting feedback on leading their practices and such, and how they offer it and how they would offer it in their settings, and supports on kind of the nuts and bolts of offering it in different settings. Then currently I also have my online offering for athletes, or really anyone who's doing high performance. So it could be athletes, artists, whatever, but it's geared predominantly to athletes. And the subtitle is for mindfulness for achieving peak performance and finding flow in sports and in life. And to me, the in life part is just as important as the sports part. Our other activities, again, sports or performing arts or whatever, are just vehicles, right, for learning good life skills. Um, and I can tailor a training to pretty much any population. So if parents want trainings, or parents want their teens to be trainings because they're sitting at home on Facebook rather than doing their online school during COVID or whatever. Um, or trainings for entire school staff, first for them to establish a practice, and then for them to start sharing mindfulness with youth. I've done all those different types of trainings online
Wonderful.
and in
Yeah,
person, but right now we're not doing in person.
yes, yes. Well, I feel the passion in your heart, and thank you for being an inspiration to me and many more. We have board members who have taken your courses, and you're throughout the book. Your name has, you'll have to
Oh,
read the
that's
whole thing to
funny.
see where it's sprinkled throughout. But thank you so much for your time today. And again, you can, if you do the annual membership for the Mindful Learning Center, there's you can click on a link to our discount partners and get a code to get a discount on Amy's online courses. And so thank you for helping us start off the summit.
You are most welcome. And thank you again for everything you've done, your passion, your enthusiasm, your willingness, as you said, to take a personal financial risk. You've really, yeah, your heart is definitely visible and palpable as well. So